Hang in there. There's a break coming in about 7 minutes. Right? So, across the 20th century, America has been suburbanizing. It's become really a suburbanizing culture, a suburban culture. Now, some would kind of trace this all the way back to the colonial period, when there was an expectation of a kind of a land of independent homesteaders across the landscape. There was a recoil at the beginning of the 20th century from the industrial city, the city that Charles Dickens so well described about as London, or it could have been about New York or Chicago, overwhelmed by soot, disease, squalor, and other miseries associated with immense congregation. Suburbanization further accelerated during the decades of the Great Depression in this country, and of course during the decade of the war that followed, and following that, the white flight resulting from the kind of traumas of the civil rights years. And finally, suburbanization in America was supported by all sorts of direct and subtle forms of public policy, from low-cost federally financed mortgages to mortgage tax deductions still today, to the interstate highway building system, to the expansion of sewers and electricity and so forth across the land. And during the great expansion in the 20th century of the American middle class, the suburb was the opportunity to decamp to places that, well, simply seemed more hospitable to life and to family rearing. Now, the critique of this suburbanization has been nearly as old as suburbanization itself. People would point out the physical dullness of the suburb, the social segregation, the car dependence, the land consumptiveness of suburban environments, the environmental harm caused by such desegregation. But mostly such critiques just sort of whizzed past citizens' ears as the personal benefits to them and their families of moving outward were certainly much clearer than the abstract social costs of sprawl. But there's a different buzz in the air today. We're very much at a crossroads, and you're largely responsible. Cities and city living have gained new appeal. There's a partial return to the heart of the city from those very places formerly seen as more hospitable to modern life. The city as spectacle is appealing to those for whom suburbia has become kind of commonplace and dull. A walk around town, an appreciation for something called pedestrian urbanism has gained favor, a welcome reprise from the kind of the reign of the car. We love our bicycles now, or some of you do. And there are the various post-industrial careers that now seem to thrive only through interaction and interdisciplinary exchange, despite the ease of communicating digitally. And your so-called creative classes, all of you hipsters, app designers, foodies, celebrity chefs, but also engineers and biomedical researchers and venture capitalists, all of a sudden now find city streets, much more so than green acres, lovely and exhilarating and a place to be. And they attract others as well. The city has become cool. General Electric is moving to Boston. How about that, right? If you read the papers. But there's an explanation for this change not often discussed, but very significant. Apart from economics or boredom with the suburb, it is the change in household formation that underlie today's changing, shifting living preferences. The answer lies in tables related to life expectancy. So as lifespans extend beyond 80 or 90 or to 100 years, if you're born today, you have a good chance of living to be 100. The percentage of a person's life dedicated to child rearing and family nurturing diminishes greatly. And so across a longer life, the time to adulthood increases. You're going to see this, you're seeing this. During the prolonged period of education and career exploration, prior to marriage and children becoming a priority, there is less interest in the nest building afforded by a house and yard removed from the din of the city. So for the staying young longer cohorts, of which you are certainly a part, access to services, amenities, professional realms, not expansive homesteads, seem to be important. Well then, now I'm talking about the first row here. Once we are older and our children are grown and away, today's and especially tomorrow's so-called empty nesters will have decades of active living to look forward to. Once liberated from family responsibilities, looking ahead to kind of a less lawn management and less daily need of cars, perhaps eager for second careers, perhaps eager for proximity to their city-attracted, now adult children, this growing cohort also goes in search of housing generally closer to urban centers. I suppose the exception might be golfing resort aficionados who might choose other places. So the result of longer and more diverse life phases has considerably reduced the once considered dominant household type in America, that is, the notion of a married couple with one or several children, and possibly a dog or a cat. Right? Early in the 20th century, more than half of households were considered precisely that. I won't ask you what you think about what the percentage is today. There's no time for questions. The breakers are waiting. Well, it is now less than 1 in 5, less than a fifth of all households are a couple with children of school age. So what does that mean? That means that a majority of the other 80% of households in America don't necessarily look forward to immediately to a quarter-acre lot off of a cul-de-sac in some fine suburban neighborhood. It may not seem so desirable. And this is the fundamental shift, not yet absorbed by our home-building industry today. So city boosters extol the virtues of innovation clusters and the creative economy and the knowledge-based investment and explain what you millennials want, as if you all thought the same exact thing, and foresee the end of the suburbs. And you can add all this to kind of prior city-making ingredients, convention centers and downtown stadia and festival marketplaces and casinos, which we're still about to go for it in Boston, and a city's very own Frank Gehry cultural icon. But the above are lures, just lures, not the underlying phenomenon behind the appeal of city living to more American households. Career opportunities, certainly, and desire for physical context still, but it is the growing percentage of households not in search of rambling homes a distance away from jobs or society that is creating this urban migration today. And unfortunately, the unaffordability crunch that we're experiencing in Cambridge or in Boston today. And so this becomes the next challenge for our cities. Rising development and land cost, coupled with the growing inequalities of earning power, will mean that fewer Americans, either young or old, will be able to partake of the new pull of the city, pull towards the city. And that, unfortunately, will begin to affect the viability of many American cities to rebound in a socially just way. That would be very unfortunate, an unfortunate irony of today's welcome, growing fascination with the city, but not a very crossroads to reach. Thank you.